The captive linguist. The skies above Proxima Colony erupted in emerald fire as the Vexari warships descended through the atmosphere. I watched from the communications tower, my fingers frozen over the emergency broadcast console. It was too late for warnings. Too late for anything but survival. Eliana, we need to evacuate now. Commander Richards shouted over the building's blaring alarms. The perimeter's already breached. I hesitated only a second longer, sending the final encrypted distress signal before abandoning my post. As the colony's lead xenolinguist, I knew our attackers well, at least in theory. The Vexari Empire had been expanding aggressively through this sector for decades, but direct confrontation with human settlements was unprecedented. Something had changed in their strategy. We never made it to the evacuation shuttles. The Vexari strike team intercepted us in the central corridor, their armored forms towering nearly 8 feet tall, exoskeletal plates gleaming under the emergency lights. Their faces remained hidden behind smooth, reflective visors that mirrored our terrified expressions back at us. A dart struck my neck before I could react. As consciousness faded, the last thing I registered was the Vexari squad leader's voice, not through translation tech, but in their native tongue. Take this one for the Sovereign's collection. The rest are expendable. I understood every word. I awoke to the sensation of silk against my skin and the distinct scent of something like cinnamon mixed with ozone. My body felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish as I blinked away the pharmaceutical haze. The ceiling above me was vaulted and crystalline, refracting light into prismatic patterns across the chamber walls. This was no prison cell, at least not in the conventional sense. The room was luxurious but alien. The furniture curved in ways that defied Earth aesthetics, materials shifting subtly in color as if responding to the environment. Along one wall, an energy field shimmered, a transparent barrier separating me from what appeared to be a much larger chamber beyond. I was in a habitat, an exhibit. The realization came with a surge of adrenaline that cleared the remaining fog from my mind. I carefully took inventory of my situation. Uninjured, dressed in unfamiliar garments of flowing azure fabric, no restraints, but definitely confined. As I attempted to establish my bearings, a door in the larger chamber slid open. She entered with the confidence of absolute authority. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, her form was elegant and imposing, humanoid in general structure, but unmistakably alien. Her skin gleamed with a subtle bluish-silver luminescence, traced with patterns that seemed to pulse with inner light. Eyes like liquid mercury surveyed the room, finally settling on me with predatory focus. Nyx'ara, sovereign of the Vexari Empire. I had studied her speeches, analyzed her diplomatic communications, but nothing prepared me for the reality of her presence. "So this is the human specimen," she said in the flowing, crystalline language of the Vexari elite. Smaller than I expected. I kept my expression carefully blank. This was crucial. She didn't know I understood her. My doctoral work in xenolinguistics had focused specifically on the Vexari language family, a fact apparently unknown to my captors. The Empire considered their royal dialect impenetrable to outsiders, a security measure they relied upon heavily. It was my only advantage, and I intended to preserve it. "Is it functioning properly?" asked another voice. A male Vexari entered, his posture deferential but his tone clinical. The sedatives were calibrated for much larger specimens. "It appears alert," Nyx'ara replied, approaching the energy field. "Primitive, but remarkably adaptable according to the reports." Their settlements were disappointingly easy to overcome, however. I remained still, allowing only a flicker of confusion to cross my face, as would be expected of someone who couldn't understand. "This one will do nicely," the Sovereign continued, studying me with detached curiosity. "Have it prepared and brought to my private chambers this evening. I find myself curious about these creatures that have caused such diplomatic concern." "As you command, Sovereign," the subordinate replied with a deep bow. After they departed, I carefully explored my enclosure, methodically testing every surface while processing what I'd learned. The Vexari had attacked human settlements, plural, not just Proxima Colony. They considered us a diplomatic concern, yet simultaneously viewed us as primitive. Most importantly, I was being transferred to the Sovereign's private chambers, where I would likely have access to invaluable intelligence, if I could survive long enough to use it. The Sovereign's private chambers exceeded anything I could have imagined. The central room alone was larger than the entire diplomatic wing of Earth's interstellar embassy. Crystalline structures rose from the floor like abstract sculptures, serving functions I could only guess at. The far wall was entirely transparent, revealing a breathtaking view of what must be the Vexari homeworld. Vast purple oceans beneath twin moons, sprawling metropolitan structures climbing impossible mountains. I had been positioned near what appeared to be a conversation pit, instructed through gestures to remain there by my escort. A decorative collar around my neck wasn't physically restrictive, but clearly served as a symbol of my status. I was property, not a prisoner, a distinction that might work to my advantage. For nearly an hour, I remained motionless, absorbing every detail of my surroundings, cataloging potential resources and escape routes out of habit, though the prospect seemed ludicrous. I was likely light years from any human territory. When Nyx'ara finally entered, she was accompanied by 3 other Vexari officials whose insignia marked them as high-ranking military commanders. The border incursions continue, one was saying, clearly continuing an earlier conversation. The humans have reinforced their position in the Arcturus sector. Their resistance is irrelevant, Nyx'ara replied, dismissing the concern with a graceful gesture. Our intelligence confirms they have no knowledge of the artifact's location. They are simply posturing. I maintained my passive expression, even as my heart rate accelerated. Artifact. What artifact could possibly justify unprovoked attacks on human colonies? The High Council suggests caution. Sovereign. Another commander spoke, his posture suggesting tension. If they were to discover our true objective. The High Council forgets its place. Nyx'ara cut him off sharply. I did not conquer 17 star systems by exercising caution. Varric. The humans will be contained, the artifact will be secured, and the Council will remember why I sit upon the celestial throne. The implicit threat silenced further discussion. As the commanders took their leave with deferential bows, I noticed one, the one called Varric, glance at me with something that might have been pity. Once alone, Nyx'ara approached me, her mercury eyes narrowing slightly. You are fortunate, human, she said, circling me slowly. Your kind typically lacks the aesthetic qualities I prefer in my collection, but there is something interesting about you. She reached out, tilting my chin upward with one elegant finger. Her touch was cool, her skin textured like fine suede. Can you understand anything at all? She mused. Or are you as mindless as the reports suggest? I blinked slowly, allowing confusion to show on my face. I made a small sound, as if trying to communicate but lacking the ability. Her lips curved in a satisfied smile. As I thought, barely sentient, despite your technological achievements. It's remarkable your species managed interstellar travel at all. She moved away, retrieving something from a crystalline cabinet, a small device that projected holographic images when activated. I recognized scenes from various human colonies, including Proxima. My stomach tightened as I realized these were surveillance feeds. Your worlds will submit, she said, more to herself than to me. The question is merely how much resistance you will offer before accepting the inevitable. As she continued reviewing the feeds, she began speaking freely about military deployments, strategic vulnerabilities, the artifact they sought. It was an intelligence goldmine, delivered directly because she believed me incapable of comprehension. The human settlements near the Cygnus Rift will be the next to fall, she remarked casually. Their defenses are particularly weak, and our scouts have detected energy signatures that may indicate proximity to the artifact. I committed every word to memory, constructing a mental map of the Vexari strategy. If when I escaped. This information could save millions of lives. But my immediate survival remained the priority. I needed to become indispensable, to secure a position that would grant me greater access while maintaining my deception. Later that night, as Nyx'ara prepared for sleep, she made a decision that would unwittingly change the course of her empire. "The human will remain here," she instructed an attendant. "Its presence has a certain calming effect, like watching the creatures in the royal aquarium." And so I became the personal pet of the Vexari sovereign, silent, observant, and far more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. As she drifted to sleep, I began planning my next move in a game she didn't even know we were playing. The irony wasn't lost on me. In her arrogance, Nyx'ara had placed her empire's greatest vulnerability right beside her. A human who understood everything, witnessed everything, and remembered everything. And I intended to make her regret it. Whispers of rebellion. Weeks passed in the sovereign's chambers, each day a careful performance of ignorance. I maintained the facade of a docile pet, my eyes vacant whenever Nyx'ara addressed me directly, my responses limited to simple gestures and expressions. But when her attention was elsewhere, I observed everything. The rotating shifts of her guards, the access protocols for her private terminals, the comings and goings of her advisors. Most importantly, I listened. The Vexari language, with its crystalline phonetics and complex tonal shifts, had been my academic passion for years. Now, it was my lifeline. "The mining operation on the human colony Arcturus IV has been established," reported Tazvil, Nyx'ara's chief military strategist, during one of their morning briefings. Resistance was minimal. Their defense systems were disabled before they realized we had penetrated their communication network. Nyx'ara lounged on her command dais, absently stroking the luminescent stones of her ceremonial collar. Casualties. Negligible on our side. The humans. Tazvel hesitated. Approximately 6,000. My heart constricted, but I kept my expression blank as I knelt nearby, arranging the exotic fruits Nyx'ara had begun providing for my enrichment. "And the artifact sensors?" she inquired. "Still no definitive readings, Sovereign. The energy signatures were promising, but inconsistent with previous detections." Nyx'ara's displeasure manifested as a subtle darkening of the luminescent patterns beneath her skin. "We cannot sustain this search indefinitely, Tazvel. The High Council grows restless with each world we claim without producing results. Perhaps if we understood better what we're searching for. If I reveal the artifact's nature to every commander and strategist, its power would be compromised," she snapped. "The knowledge remains with me alone. That is how it must be." After Tazvel's departure, Nyx'ara turned her mercury gaze upon me. Over the weeks, her initial scientific curiosity had evolved into something more complex, a sort of possessive fascination. She approached, crouching gracefully to my level. "You are a strange creature," she mused, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "So fragile, yet persistent. I wonder what thoughts move through that primitive mind." I blinked slowly, tilting my head like a confused animal. Her lips curved. "I believe you're growing more responsive. Perhaps there's more capacity for adaptation in your species than we've given credit." She stood and crossed to her communication terminal, unaware that I carefully observed the 12-digit access code her fingers traced across its crystalline surface. That evening, a rare opportunity presented itself. Nyx'ara had been summoned to an emergency council session, leaving me alone in her chambers with only a single guard posted outside. The moment she departed, I moved with purpose. The Vexari rarely employed traditional locks or restraints within the palace, relying instead on biological authentication and the absolute obedience of their servants. My habitat area had no physical barriers, merely the understanding that I should not leave it. An understanding I was about to violate. I approached the communication terminal cautiously. Even if discovered, I could feign simple curiosity, the actions of a pet investigating its surroundings. Taking a deep breath, I traced the same pattern I'd seen Nyx'ara use countless times. The terminal illuminated, recognizing the input sequence. I had perhaps minutes before the guard might check on me or the system might flag unauthorized access. Working quickly, I navigated through the unfamiliar interface, searching for information about human colonies, defensive capabilities, anything that might help our people. What I found instead was far more troubling. Encrypted files referenced the ancestral key, apparently the artifact they sought. According to the fragments I could access, it was believed to unlock ancient Vexari technology, weapons of unimaginable power from a forgotten era of their civilization. The Empire's aggression against humanity wasn't random. They had detected energy signatures consistent with the key on multiple human worlds. They believed, somehow, that humans had discovered and were concealing their most sacred relic. A soft sound at the chamber entrance froze my blood. I quickly deactivated the terminal and retreated to my designated area, adopting a position of rest, only to find myself face to face not with a guard, but with another alien. This one was different from the Vexari. Smaller, with mottled green-gray skin and large, multifaceted eyes. A servant based on the simple garment and the deference in its posture. "You understand," it said in flawless Vexari. Not a question, a statement. I maintained my confused expression, heart pounding. The servant glanced toward the door, then back to me. "Your eyes track the terminals when they speak of your worlds. You tense when they mention casualties. I have watched you, human, as you have watched them." I remained silent, evaluating my options. This moment could end my deception, or provide an unexpected ally. "I am Krell," the servant continued, moving to straighten the cushions in my habitat, as if simply performing duties. "There are others like me in the palace, others who serve because we must, not because we choose." Still, I hesitated. "The sovereign returns soon," Krell said, lowering its voice further. "If you understand me, take the blue fruit when I offer the tray. If not," it shrugged, "then I am simply a servant talking to itself." Krell moved away, attending to other tasks around the chamber. When the door slid open minutes later, he was merely arranging a tray of fruits near my habitat, the very model of the dutiful servant. Nyx'ara swept in, her luminescent patterns pulsing with barely contained anger. Incompetence, she hissed to no one in particular. Surrounded by fossils clinging to tradition, while the future slips through our grasp. She noticed Krell and waved dismissively. "Leave us." As Krell bowed and turned to go, the servant extended the fruit tray slightly in my direction. Among the exotic offerings, a single blue sphere stood out. Without hesitation, I reached for it. Krell's multifaceted eyes flickered, the equivalent of a knowing nod, before they departed. I had just made contact with what I could only assume was the Vexari Palace's underground resistance. "The rebellion has existed for generations," Krell explained 3 nights later, during one of the brief windows when we could safely communicate. We met in a service corridor adjacent to Nyx'ara's chambers while she attended a diplomatic function. Since the current sovereign's ancestor claimed the throne through bloodshed rather than birthright. "And the other servants are part of this?" I asked, still adapting to speaking Vexari aloud after weeks of silence. "Many, though not all. The Vexari see us as mindless drones, much as they see you. It makes us invisible, and invisibility has advantages." I nodded, understanding perfectly. "What about the artifact they're searching for?" "The ancestral key." Krell's multifaceted eyes widened slightly. "You've accessed restricted information. Dangerous." "I need to understand what they want with my people," I insisted. "They've killed thousands already." "The key is part of our oldest legends," Krell explained reluctantly. "Said to be created during the Luminous Age, before the Sovereign's line corrupted our civilization. It's both a weapon and a tool of governance, a means to control the ancient defense systems that once protected our worlds. And they think humans have it. They detected energy signatures consistent with ancestral technology near your settlements. The Sovereign believes your people discovered it and are either unaware of its importance or deliberately hiding it. This revelation shifted everything. The Vexari weren't simply expanding their empire. They were desperately hunting for something they believed we possessed, something that could threaten Nyx'ara's power. "I need to get a message to my people," I said. "Warn them, explain what's happening." Krell made a soft clicking sound, their version of a negative. "Impossible. All communications are monitored. Even if we could access a quantum relay, the transmission would be traced immediately. Then I need to escape. Also nearly impossible." But Krell hesitated. "Not entirely impossible. There may be a way, but it would require time, planning, and—" The servant glanced at me. "You would need to get closer to the sovereign, gain her trust." The very thought made my skin crawl. "She sees me as a pet, an amusement." "For now," Krell agreed, "but she has taken unusual interest in you. The others in her collection rarely last more than a few days before she loses interest. You've intrigued her for weeks now." Before I could respond, a subtle vibration pulsed through Krell's communication device. A warning. "The Sovereign's function is ending early," they whispered. "We must return immediately." As we hurried back through the service passages, Krell added, "Be careful. The closer you get to her, the more dangerous your position becomes." I slipped back into my habitat just minutes before Nyx'ara returned. When she entered, I was exactly where she expected, curled on my cushions, apparently asleep. Through slitted eyes, I watched her dismiss her attendants and move to her private terminal. Something had changed in her demeanor. The usual cold confidence had been replaced by a tightly controlled tension. She accessed restricted files, her fingers moving urgently across the interface. "Another failure," she muttered to herself, reviewing what appeared to be a report. "How can they not find it? Our sensors cannot be wrong." She paced the chamber, her luminescent patterns fluctuating with each surge of emotion. Finally, she approached my habitat, standing over me for a long moment. I maintained the steady breathing of sleep. "Perhaps you are the key to understanding them," she said softly, speaking to herself more than to me. "Your species has something we need, something you may not even recognize." She turned away, but her words lingered in the air between us. In that moment, I realized Krell was right. I needed to get closer, to become more than just an amusement. I needed to become indispensable. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following day, Nyx'ara was conducting a high-level strategic meeting in her chambers. I remained in my usual position, seemingly oblivious to the critical discussions surrounding me. "The human resistance grows more coordinated," reported Commander Varric, the same official who had glanced at me with something like pity weeks earlier. "They've repelled our advances on 3 outposts in the Cygnus sector." Nyx'ara's expression darkened. "How? Their technology is inferior, their tactics primitive. They appear to be anticipating our strategies," another commander explained reluctantly, "as if they somehow know our protocols." "Impossible," Nyx'ara snapped. "Our tactical systems are impenetrable." "Nevertheless, Sovereign, they seem to be adapting specifically to counter our approaches." I kept my expression vacant, but inwardly I felt a surge of pride. Humanity was fighting back, learning, adapting. Nyx'ara dismissed her commanders with barely concealed frustration. As the last one departed, she flung a crystalline ornament across the room, shattering it against the wall. This was my moment. I reacted to the sound, startling visibly, a natural response that would not betray my understanding. Then, slowly, I rose from my cushions and approached the scattered fragments. Kneeling, I began carefully gathering the pieces. Nyx'ara watched with narrow eyes as I collected each shard, arranging them on a nearby surface. Then, to her evident surprise, I began fitting them together, reconstructing the shattered ornament piece by piece. "What are you doing?" she demanded, approaching me. I continued working, appearing focused solely on the task, as if compelled by some basic instinct to restore order. The ornament had broken along clean lines, a complex but logical pattern that I methodically reversed. When I finished, the reconstructed piece sat before us, the fracture lines barely visible. I sat back, adopting my usual passive expression. Nyx'ara stared first at the ornament, then at me, her mercury eyes calculating. "You solved the pattern," she said slowly. "A simple task, perhaps, but not for a mindless creature." She crouched beside me, studying my face with new intensity. "What else might you understand, I wonder?" She rose suddenly, crossed to her strategic display, and activated it. A three-dimensional map of contested space appeared, human colonies marked in blue, Vexari forces in red. "Come," she commanded, gesturing imperiously. I hesitated, then rose, affecting uncertainty as I approached. "Look," she instructed, indicating the holographic display. "What do you see?" I gazed at the complex strategic map, allowing my eyes to track across it with apparent confusion. Then, deliberately, I reached toward a section where red forces were clustered near a blue outpost, the most obvious tactical focus even to someone with no military training. Nyx'ara watched intently as I touched the hologram, causing the section to expand. "Yes," she murmured, "that's where we're focusing our next assault." A pause. Then, "Show me where you would attack next." It was a test, and a dangerous one. Reveal too much intelligence, and my cover would be blown. Appear too limited, and this opportunity would pass. I needed to strike a perfect balance, intelligent enough to be useful, primitive enough to remain unthreatening. I studied the map, then hesitantly touched another location, a secondary human outpost with minimal defenses, an obvious target but not the most strategically valuable one. Nyx'ara's lips curved slightly. "Interesting. Not our primary target, but a viable alternative." She manipulated the display, highlighting different sectors. "And here, where would your people be most vulnerable?" I continued the delicate performance, revealing just enough pattern recognition to intrigue her without demonstrating true strategic understanding. By the session's end, Nyx'ara was looking at me with new consideration. "You are a curious specimen," she said finally. "Limited, certainly, but with unexpected capacities. Perhaps you can be more than mere decoration." That night, as she retired to her private chamber, she instructed her attendants, "The human will join my strategic sessions tomorrow. I wish to explore this aptitude further." As the doors closed behind her, I exchanged the briefest glance with Krell, who had entered with the evening service staff. The servant gave an almost imperceptible nod. Phase 1 of our dangerous gambit had succeeded. I was no longer just the sovereign's pet. I was becoming her tool, a position far more precarious, but infinitely more valuable for what I needed to accomplish. What Nyx'ara didn't realize was that she had just invited a spy into the heart of her military planning, and I intended to use every scrap of information to save my people and perhaps bring down an empire. But as I settled onto my cushions that night, a troubling thought surfaced. Nyx'ara was no fool. Her interest in me had shifted too quickly, too conveniently. The question nagged at me as I drifted toward uneasy sleep. Was I truly deceiving the sovereign, or was she simply playing a longer, more subtle game? The cosmic gambit. The transition from pet to advisor was subtle but unmistakable. Within days, I had been moved from my habitat enclosure to proper quarters, still under guard, still captive, but with accommodations befitting someone of value rather than mere decoration. My new chambers connected directly to Nyx'ara's strategic planning room, where I now spent hours each day, supposedly demonstrating my primitive pattern recognition skills for the sovereign's amusement. In reality, I was absorbing critical intelligence about Vexari fleet movements, defense capabilities, and communication protocols, all while continuing to play the role of a semi-intelligent curiosity, capable of identifying basic patterns, but nothing more sophisticated. The human continues to display unexpected aptitudes. Nyx'ara informed her inner circle during one such session. I stood nearby, pointing at various configurations on the tactical display as instructed, seemingly oblivious to their discussion. Its species may possess more useful qualities than we initially assessed. Commander Varric, whose skepticism had become increasingly evident, frowned. Sovereign, with respect, are we certain this creature isn't more aware than it appears? The coincidence of its insights. Are you suggesting a primitive species that hasn't even mastered stable wormhole technology could somehow understand our language and strategic doctrine? Nyx'ara cut him off with a dismissive gesture. Its brain shows activation in pattern recognition centers. Nothing more. It's a tool, Varric, one I am simply leveraging more effectively than my predecessors might have. I maintained my vacant expression, but inwardly catalogued Varric as a potential threat. His suspicion, while not yet conviction, could unravel everything. Later that night, Krell visited my new quarters under the pretense of delivering evening refreshments. The rebellion grows impatient, they whispered, arranging crystal decanters while checking for surveillance. The Sovereign's forces massacred an entire settlement of Praeaxians yesterday, a warning to those who shelter deserters from her fleet. I need more time, I murmured, keeping my back to the room's monitoring devices. I've almost pieced together their communication encryption protocols. Once I have that, we can send warnings to human outposts. Coordinate resistance. Time is running out, Krell insisted. Tomorrow brings the Celestial Conclave, the annual gathering of all major imperial powers. The Sovereign plans to announce a final offensive against your people's central colonies. My blood ran cold. How soon? 3 days after the conclave. A simultaneous attack on 7 of your core worlds. I closed my eyes briefly, calculating options. Is there any way to access a secure communication terminal during the conclave, with the security forces focused on the gathering? Impossible, Krell interrupted. But there is another opportunity. They hesitated, multifaceted eyes darting nervously. The ancestral key. We've discovered what it truly is. I leaned forward slightly. And? Not what? Who? According to our oldest records, the key isn't an object. It's a bloodline, a genetic marker passed through generations that can activate the ancient defense systems. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They think it's inhumans. That's why they're attacking our colonies. The energy signatures they detected correspond to the markers described in our sacred texts, but they're looking for technology, not biology. The Sovereign doesn't understand what she's truly seeking. My mind raced through the implications. Does this mean some humans carry this genetic marker? That we could actually control these ancient weapons? Theoretically. But first, we would need to identify who carries the marker and get them to the activation chamber on Vexari Prime. I shook my head. Even if that were possible, we'd never. A soft chime interrupted us. The warning signal Krell had established. Someone was approaching. In an instant, we resumed our respective roles. When the door slid open, I was sitting vacant-eyed by the window, while Krell arranged my quarters with exaggerated deference. Nyx'ara entered, her luminescent patterns pulsing with intensity that suggested heightened emotion. She dismissed Krell with a flick of her wrist, then turned her mercury gaze upon me. Tomorrow's conclave will determine the future of this sector, she said, studying me with unusual intensity. Your species' resistance has proven inconvenient. I blinked slowly, affecting confusion at her tone, if not her words. She approached, circling me with predatory grace. I've had you analyzed extensively. Your neural patterns, your physiological responses. She stopped directly before me. Do you know what my scientists discovered, human? My heart raced, but I maintained my vacant expression. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Absolutely nothing unusual. You are, by all measurable standards, precisely what you appear to be, a moderately intelligent specimen of a primitive species. Relief washed through me, carefully concealed. And yet, she continued, straightening. I find myself unconvinced. She moved to the window, gazing out at the crystalline spires of the imperial capital. In 17 cycles of rule, I have never encountered a species that adapted so quickly to captivity, that demonstrated such precise pattern recognition without corresponding linguistic capacity. She turned back to me, mercury eyes narrowed. Tomorrow, you will attend the conclave, not as my pet, but as my subject of interest. The assembled powers will witness your capabilities firsthand, and perhaps help me determine exactly what you are. After she departed, I remained motionless, processing this development. The conclave represented both unprecedented opportunity and catastrophic risk. I would be surrounded by the Empire's most powerful figures, and subjected to their collective scrutiny. If my deception held, I might gain access to information that could save human civilization. If it failed, I would doom not only myself but potentially Krell and the entire resistance network. Sleep eluded me that night as I planned for every contingency. By morning, I had reached only one certainty. The time for passive observation was ending. One way or another, the conclave would force my hand. The grand celestial hall defied comprehension. Its crystal dome arched hundreds of meters overhead, refracting the light of 3 suns into prismatic patterns that danced across gathered dignitaries from 100 worlds. The floor itself was transparent, revealing the swirling nebula clouds far below. The hall had been constructed in orbit, a neutral territory where the sector's powers could convene. I stood beside Nyx'ara's elevated throne, dressed in ceremonial garments that marked me as her special subject. The collar around my neck had been replaced with an intricate silver circlet, still a symbol of ownership, but one that conveyed value rather than subservience. The human specimen will demonstrate pattern recognition capabilities that challenge our understanding of their species, Nyx'ara announced to the assembled powers. Observe. What followed was an elaborate display, with various imperial scientists presenting me with increasingly complex puzzles, tactical simulations, and pattern identification tests. I navigated each with careful precision, showing enough intelligence to be remarkable for a primitive species, but not enough to suggest I understood the political theater unfolding around me. Throughout the demonstrations, I maintained my role perfectly, yet beneath my placid exterior, I was meticulously cataloging every face, every reaction, and most importantly, every unguarded conversation happening around me. The assembled dignitaries spoke freely in my presence, assuming I couldn't possibly understand their discussions of military strategies, political alliances, and territorial disputes. The human resistance continues to be problematic, remarked a Vexari admiral to a colleague from a neighboring system. They've somehow adapted countermeasures to our latest targeting systems. Perhaps they're more resourceful than the sovereign admits, his companion replied with a subtle gesture toward Nyx'ara. Such moments were invaluable, confirming what I'd suspected. The Empire's expansion wasn't universally supported. Fractures existed within the alliance, cracks that might be exploited. As the formal demonstrations concluded, Nyx'ara announced a short recess before the conclave's main deliberations. Attendees dispersed throughout the hall, forming small conversational clusters. I remained beside the sovereign's empty throne, apparently oblivious to my surroundings. It was then that Commander Varric approached, accompanied by a tall, rail-thin alien species I hadn't encountered before, one with crystalline growths protruding from their temples. "The specimen is certainly unusual," Varric remarked, gesturing toward me while addressing his companion. "But I remain unconvinced of its true value. Perhaps a deeper examination is warranted," the crystalline alien suggested, their voice resonating with unusual harmonics. My people's telepathic capabilities could reveal what conventional analysis cannot. My pulse quickened. A telepathic scan would instantly expose my deception. "An interesting proposal, Exorlath," came Nyx'ara's voice as she returned unexpectedly. "But the human remains my property, and I have other plans for it." The alien, Sorlath, inclined their head respectfully. "As you wish, Sovereign. I merely offered out of scientific curiosity." "Your curiosity is noted," Nyx'ara replied, her tone carrying a subtle warning. Now, I believe the Draconian delegation was seeking your counsel regarding the border dispute. After they departed, Nyx'ara's gaze shifted to me, something unreadable in her mercury eyes. You continue to attract attention, little human. I wonder why. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might summon Xorlaf back and authorize the telepathic scan. Instead, she simply gestured for me to follow as she moved toward the central gathering area, where the main proceedings would soon begin. As we walked, a commotion erupted on the far side of the hall. Guards surrounded a minor dignitary who appeared to be having some kind of seizure. While attention focused on the disturbance, I felt something pressed discreetly into my palm. Krell had somehow infiltrated the service staff for the conclave. The object in my hand was small, a data crystal, barely larger than my fingernail. I closed my fingers around it instinctively, keeping my expression vacant. Wait here, Nyx'ara commanded, moving toward the disturbance. Do not move. The moment she was gone, I slipped the crystal into a hidden pocket within my ceremonial garments. Whatever information it contained, Krell had risked everything to deliver it. When the conclave reconvened, the mood had shifted subtly. The disturbance, apparently a minor diplomatic incident rather than a medical emergency, had created an undercurrent of tension. As Nyx'ara took her place at the center of the assembly, she launched immediately into the agenda's most controversial point. The human expansion must be contained, she declared, activating a holographic display of contested space. Their settlements encroach on territories vital to our interests, and their technology advances at an unprecedented rate. I propose a coordinated initiative to establish permanent boundaries. What followed was a thinly veiled declaration of war, dressed in diplomatic language. The boundaries she proposed would cut off half of humanity's established colonies and place them under Vexari control. The justification, security concerns, and resource rights, masked the true objective I now understood: finding the ancestral key they believed humans unknowingly possessed. As the deliberations continued, I noticed Varric watching me with increasing intensity. His suspicion was growing, becoming dangerous. I needed to act soon, but with the entire Imperial High Command present, any false move would be catastrophic. The opportunity came during an unexpected recess, called when the Draconian delegation demanded private consultation regarding territorial concessions. As dignitaries dispersed once more, Nyx'ara was pulled into an urgent conversation with her advisors. Guard the human, she instructed a nearby soldier before striding away. The guard positioned himself stoically beside me, clearly considering this duty beneath him. I maintained my vacant expression while surreptitiously examining my surroundings. The guard's attention drifted repeatedly to the heated discussion among the Draconian representatives. I swayed slightly, then more pronouncedly, finally collapsing to the floor in a convincing faint. The guard hesitated, then reluctantly knelt to check my condition, exactly as I'd hoped. The moment he leaned over me, I struck with precision, pressing exactly the right point on Vexari anatomy to trigger a temporary neural disruption. Knowledge gleaned from weeks of careful observation of the palace guards. He slumped forward, unconscious but alive. I dragged him quickly behind a decorative column, swapped our communication devices, and moved purposefully toward a service corridor I'd identified earlier. The staff passages ran throughout the station, allowing servants to move invisibly between sections. Using the guard's security credential, I navigated through increasingly restricted areas until I reached what appeared to be a communication hub, unmanned during the conclave proceedings. Working quickly, I inserted Krell's data crystal into the terminal. It contained exactly what I'd hoped: access codes and encryption protocols for the Vexari emergency broadcast system. With trembling fingers, I composed a message to human command. URGENT, Vexari planning simultaneous attack on 7 core worlds in 3 days. Arcturus, Proxima Centauri, Ta Ceti, Epsilon Eridani, Beta Hydri, Fomalhaut, and Sol. Attack vectors and fleet compositions attached. They seek genetic marker belief present in human population. Ancestral key. Evacuation recommended. Defensive strategies follow. I appended everything I'd learned about Vexari tactics, vulnerabilities, and the true nature of their quest. Then, using the Imperial override codes Krell had provided, I transmitted the message on every frequency humans were known to monitor. Alarms blared instantly. I'd known they would. Even with override codes, such a massive unauthorized transmission would trigger security protocols. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, before security forces converged on my location. But I wasn't finished. With the remaining time, I accessed the Imperial announcement system. The same network Nyx'ara had used to address her subjects across 17 star systems. Using the command protocols I'd observed her implementing countless times, I broadcast a different message to every Vexari-controlled world. The ancestral key is not an object to be found, but a genetic lineage passed through generations. The sovereign conceals this truth to maintain power. Ancient texts in the Imperial Archive confirm. The key belongs to no single species or ruler, but to all who would use it for protection rather than dominion. It was a message of revolution, revealing the truth Nyx'ara had hidden even from her own people. The reaction would be immediate and chaotic, exactly what humanity needed to prepare its defenses. As I finished the transmission, the door to the communication hub slid open. Nyx'ara stood framed in the entrance, her mercury eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that might have been admiration. "You understand us," she said simply. "You always did." I straightened, no longer maintaining the pretense. "Yes." "How long?" "Always. Since the beginning." Guards appeared behind her, weapons raised, but she held up a hand, stopping them. "You've just declared war on an empire that spans 17 systems. Your species cannot hope to survive." "We're not declaring war," I replied calmly. "We're refusing to be victims." "There's a difference." Her luminescent patterns pulsed with complex emotions. "You've also incited rebellion throughout my territories. Those ancient texts you referenced, they don't exist." "No," I agreed. "But your people don't know that. They'll search, and in searching, they'll question. And questions are the beginning of change." For a long moment, she studied me with an unreadable expression. Then, unexpectedly, she dismissed the guards with a sharp gesture. "When we were alone," she spoke softly, "I suspected, you know. Not from the beginning, but soon after. No creature learns patterns as quickly as you did without comprehension. Then why keep me close? Why risk everything?" "Because I needed to understand what humanity truly is." She moved closer, her movements no longer predatory but cautious. "The energy signatures we detected, they shouldn't exist outside our species. Yet they do, in yours." Understanding dawned. "You think humans and Vexari share ancestry. More than that. I believe your kind might be the descendants of those who created the ancient defense systems, the ones who departed Vexari Prime millennia ago during the Great Schism." The revelation was staggering. If true, it would rewrite the understanding of human origins. "So this was never about conquest," I said slowly. "It was about confirmation." "Conquest is the means, not the end," she replied. "The Council would never have authorized the resources needed based on mere theory. I needed proof." A distant explosion rocked the station, the first signs of chaos spreading through the conclave as my messages reached their recipients. "Your transmission will save many of your people," Nyx'ara acknowledged. "But it won't end this. The question of our shared ancestry remains." "Then let's answer it together," I suggested, taking the greatest gamble of all. "Not through war, but cooperation. Your scientists, our geneticists. There must be a better way than extermination." She studied me for a long moment. "You would propose alliance, after what we've done." "I propose survival, for both our species. If what you suspect is true, our fates may be more entwined than either of us realized." Another explosion, closer this time. Security alerts blared throughout the station. They'll execute you for treason if they find you here, I warned. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Then perhaps it's time both of us disappeared. She moved to the terminal, entering a series of commands. There's a diplomatic vessel in Docking Bay 7. It's small, fast, and programmed to accept my biosignature. Why would you help me escape? I'm not helping you escape, she corrected, finishing her input. I'm ensuring we both survive long enough to discover the truth. The Council will assume I was abducted or killed in the chaos you've created. By the time they realize otherwise, we'll have answers one way or another. It was madness, trusting the very being who had ordered the destruction of human colonies. Yet I recognized the calculating intelligence behind her mercury eyes. Nyx'ara was adaptable above all else. If circumstances change, so did her strategy. This doesn't make us allies, I cautioned as we moved toward the emergency access corridor. Of course not, she agreed smoothly. Consider us reluctant research partners, with the fate of 2 species as our project. As alarms blared and the station descended into diplomatic chaos, we slipped away. The human linguist who had outsmarted an empire, and the alien sovereign who had recognized too late that her captive was her equal. What awaited us, collaboration, betrayal, or discovery, remained to be seen. But as our small vessel detached from the station and disappeared into the stellar darkness, one thing was certain. The silent observer had finally found her voice, and the stars themselves would echo with its consequences.